Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Gran Turismo 7. It's finally that time for the final car review from Gran Turismo 7 update 1.42. And yes, you heard me right. I know we're currently on update 1.43, but this car originally stems from update 1.42. It's the meme itself, the most controversial car probably in GT7 history, the Bulgari VGT. Now, if you don't know any of this backstory, I'll explain it throughout the video, but as always with these car reviews, we need to start off with the price point itself, and it comes in with the standard VGT price point of 1 million credits. As you can see from the stats, 619.47 pp, which is relatively low and much lower than I originally expected. It has an MR drivetrain, 394 brake horsepower, once again much lower than I originally thought. However, it is relatively lightweight at 1000 kilograms and it's beautifully naturally aspirated. No turbocharger to be found on this car, and it isn't even an option to go ahead and purchase one. That is a bit of a downside. Overall, this car very much lacks the features that include upgrades and essential tuning. It is pretty much you buy it and you are get what you're given, apart from the option to actually change the tires on this thing. So let's get into the review of the car itself. A quick explanation before we get into it, if you've never joined me for a car review, because this is a VGT and lacks any significant upgrades, it will only be eligible for the Nordschleife hot lap, where we test cars straight out of the dealership and head around for a lap of the Nordschleife. Now, if this did have upgrades, we'd head over to High Speed Ring, fully upgraded, to also see where it places on a lap time leaderboard over there, but unfortunately it doesn't. It's a very typical VGT problem that you are essentially just getting what you are given. You don't have any ability to upgrade the likes of suspension, turbocharging and all that kind of stuff, and you can't even fine-tune them either. It's a very much set in its ways car with the ability to only change the tyre compound. So let's talk about this very controversial car. So unless you've been living under a rock or you're very new to Gran Turismo 7, let me explain to you why this car is very controversial. If you remember back to the start of the video, I did actually go on to say this is the final car review of update 1.42, which may have confused some of you considering we are currently in update 1.43 and I've actually just finished off reviewing every single car from that update. Essentially what happened was this was a car that was shown off at the World Series Finals, I think back in November of 2023, alongside the Genesis VGT. Now originally the plan was that if you watch the viewers campaign, you'd get the Genesis VGT early. In that case, you would then go ahead and receive the car in January alongside update 1.42, which was that month's corresponding update. Now obviously the Bulgari was also shown off and we expected both of them to come alongside each other, or maybe possibly the Bulgari would have come at a later date. All of a sudden, January rolls around and the typical silhouettes are kind of shown off by Kaz over on Twitter. And there's 3 cars in there. Now, 2 of them we already knew. That was the Genesis VGT and this, the Bulgari VGT, alongside the very boxy looking Suzuki Jimny. So typically what happens is the cars that are in the silhouettes will then get released the next week, obviously with that new update. Now what happened here is we saw the Genesis, we kind of knew what all of these silhouettes were. Obviously we knew what the Bulgari was. The Genesis obviously originally being advertised as an early access car for players. That kind of got completely scrapped at the last minute by the look of it. So what should have happened with viewers campaign gift car rewards for new cars, that car will then come out sort of as a gift reward in your ticket selection around about a month early for players that took part in the viewers campaign. Then it will be released worldwide a month later. No big issue, you know, if you didn't manage to watch it, you'd just get it a month later. However, that was completely backtracked last minute and the Bulgari all of a sudden just wasn't there. So this was not only one of the weakest updates, if not the weakest update of GT7 history, it also only featured 2 cars. And last minute, basically in the patch notes, it went on to say that the owners of the Bulgari watch, which coexists with this car, would get it a month early, and there was no prior notice to that. It just kind of popped up out of nowhere all of a sudden. Unless you paid 4.5k for a watch, you wouldn't get this car for another month, and it felt like a bit of a kick in the teeth considering how weak the update was. It felt like very bad timing to actually do this, hence why a month later we're only just getting around to finishing off those 1.42 car reviews. So is the Bulgari VGT actually any good? And I will go on to say probably not to the majority of players. However, this car actually does have a trick up its sleeve, which I will talk about a little bit later. But the main thing I noticed as soon as I looked at this thing was actually just how low it is on a PP rating. And in terms of the power and I guess overall stats, it really doesn't necessarily scream VGT. And in fact, that's not necessarily a bad thing to me personally. I just know there's a lot of people out there that prefer the VGTs to just be absolutely ridiculous. But for me, although this car looks absolutely bizarre from a distance, I would say it's perhaps one of the most based in reality VGTs since that Suzuki VGT way back in I think May of 2022. In terms of the styling point, I actually really like this. It feels a little bit cyberpunky in terms of the way that it's got that sort of chrome look to it, the sort of wheel fans that it's got on there, and in terms of the overall styling, it really looks like a bit of a 1950s roadster race car, and I'm really actually enjoying it the more I look at it. I actually think from a visual standpoint, it's really not that ugly. In fact, some of the beautiful details inside to coexist with the watch really are worth a nice close look. If you've got VR, I fully recommend just going in and just having a look around the cockpit and just giving this thing a go in cockpit mode as well, because it's absolutely fantastic to drive in that version. It's not absolutely going to blow your socks off from a, I guess, performance standpoint, but definitely in terms of the way it performs with the right tyre compound, this car absolutely comes alive. As I mentioned, to me it really does reminisce a 1950s kind of open top race car, and I absolutely love it. And again, it feels very much on turn with something like a faster version of the Maserati, which is also kind of falling into that category of being a retro race car, which I absolutely love. It just kind of feels like a modern day version of that. So again, I did kind of mention there is a little bit of a problem though. In its standard form, it is definitely not very good. I feel like Polyphony really chose the wrong tyre compound for this car. Although it's relatively low on power output and it isn't absolutely going to blow your socks off, the compound that the developers originally put on just don't feel like they match the car. It is certainly a car that needs racing tyre compounds. Once you do that, this thing absolutely becomes a beautiful car to drive. In fact, surprisingly good. And in terms of its overall potential, whilst you cannot go ahead and fine tune and customize in that way, putting on the race tyres and going ahead to some of them grinding events, surprisingly enough, this car sits right in the 700 pp range to go and grind the likes of Le Mans, Bathurst and all the other 700 events, and absolutely nails them as well. Well, not only does it have insanely good tyre life, it also has insanely good fuel consumption as well. So on paper, it doesn't look like the best car at all, and originally when I first jumped in this car in its standard form, I didn't even want to go ahead and do a review. But a few days after the update dropped, I went around, put a few racing compounds on it and had a play around in VR, and all of a sudden I find myself actually enjoying this thing much more than I originally ever thought I would. In fact, it was so bad at first, like I mentioned, that I didn't want to review it, and then completely I had my mind changed. You know, this car is absolutely fantastic. If you are a VR player, I fully recommend testing it in there. The details in this thing are absolutely second to none. It's very typical of Gran Turismo, but they look absolutely stunning. And once you've got those race compounds on, this car is actually very good for earning that money back. Overall, much better than expected. So let's have a look at the overall time of this car. In terms of the overall PP rating, it falls in the 700 category, in which it comes 10th out of 11, beating the GAC Maverick from a few updates prior. It comes in with a time of a 7 minutes 25.264, which is just slightly slower than the Dodge Challenger SRT Demon from 2018. And for me, that's rather quite surprising. The Demon made a ton of time up on the straight sections of the Nordschleife, whereas the Bulgari doesn't hit anywhere near that top speed. However, considering this thing is running on the worst possible compound for that car, I feel if Polyphony put the right tyre compound on, this car would have been much more enjoyable to drive straight out the box and much more competitive pretty much across the board. So the Bulgari VGT, yes, it was controversial, but it is finally here for all players to jump in and have a go with. Was it worth the wait? Probably not to most people, but I am not ashamed to admit that I actually really enjoyed this car. If you've got VR, it's absolutely a must. The fine details, the racing tyres, the way it drives, it absolutely feels brilliant. And in all honesty, I think you might surprise yourselves as well if you give it a go for the money grinds. So, big thank you to all of my members: Wigberto, Mystics, J-Ro, Victory, Mailton, Louis Vieira, Old School Gamers, Crazy Cobra, Carl Wyatt, Phil Wilmot, Dominic Saylor, Dan, Sean and Chris 75572. Thank you for your continued support. Let me know what you think of the Bulgari down below. Again, I went into this with an open mind after a few days and I feel like it's become a completely different car to me. I know most people will flame it, but let me know down below. Take care, guys. Peace.